Okie dokie, let's do this. How's the transmission? Can everybody hear me? Can everybody see me? How are we doing? Excellent. Sorry for the short technical difficulties. We had to make a last minute modification to the keynote, but all is taken care of. And that means that without further ado, let me start by looking at the household notes as usual. Household notes first. And in order to do that, I'm going to share my screen. And there we go. So today is going to be the long promised part two of the previous case study that we did, which focused on the Cal loudspeaker, column array loudspeakers used in Fête de Vignerons. And today is going to be part two, where we get to talk about what I've lovingly come to call the mushrooms that you can see in this photo. José is going to tell you all about it, and he brought fellow sound engineer, Martin Reich, like last time, who will be joining us today. So that's awesome. I'll let José take care of the rest of the introductions. I'm just going to skip to the Zoom portion because that is the communication platform that we're using to conduct these webinars. And that means that in front of you, you are expected to see a window not unlike the one you see over here. If you would like to see who else is joining you on today's calls, all you have to do is click on the participants button, in which case the right-hand side window will appear, showing you today's fellow attendants. We encourage you to ask questions also when we're in session. If there's something that is not clear to you, if anyone on the call is not explaining himself or herself properly, or you would like us to repeat ourselves, by all means, let us know. But in order to do so, please do it in an organized fashion, which is why we encourage you to make use of the raise hand feature. Whenever you click on that button, a blue hand icon shows up, informing us that you're about to ask the question. Now, in order to ask the question itself, we encourage you to make use of the chat feature. So whenever you click on the chat icon, the right-hand window splits in half, allowing you to ask questions. In order to do so, you have to enter your text message at the bottom of that field, and you can address it to everyone on the call. Or if you happen to see a friend, fellow family member, fellow colleague, friend or family member, then you can also message that person in private. For those that are currently joining us through the Meyer Sound user community on Facebook, we're simulcasting as we speak. Welcome to you as well. Currently, the group counts over 8,850 members. It was almost 8,888 today, in which case I would have put 8888 on the slide, but we were 3 members short. So hopefully after today's session, that will change, and we actually get to put that we have over 8,888 members in the Facebook group, which would be freaking awesome. Okay, like I said during the introduction, there are 2 webinars that you might want to consider watching if you haven't done so already, which already touched upon today's case study, because Fête de Vignerons, as we're about to discover, is one of those unique projects where Cal is used in a great artistic way, a real enabler to pursue artistic goals. And if you want to know more about the Cal, also known as column array loudspeaker, then be sure to watch those webinars, because hopefully today we get to talk a lot about the Leo family products used in this particular project, and less about the Cal loudspeakers that we discussed at great length during an entire webinar, which was called Case Study Cal. And that means that without further ado, I'm honored to introduce today's guest lecturer, which is José Gaudin, which we also met last Wednesday, because today we're going to see another prime example of all the tools in the tool set that allow us to design these kinds of systems from the early design stages using map to deployment. So José Gaudin brought Martin, so I will leave it up to José to introduce Martin once more, but let's take it to our technical support specialist, José Gaudin. José, are you there?
I am.
Excellent. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for bringing your friend Martin. Take it away.
Cool. Thank you very much for the great introduction. As always, Marwan's been presenting all the webinars, and he's been a tremendous presenter. He's grown also as the Zoom officer. So he's managing all the Zoom platform with great talent and instructing us not to how to do the same. I hope you hear me good.
Yes, audio is perfect.
Okay, great. Because so I'm in a theater today, and we just finished. I just finished some work, and so it's been a stressful day. But now hopefully all my slides are in order. Otherwise, Martin will help me. So I'm going to share my screen to start with this presentation.
I can confirm that we can see your keynote.
Great. So yes, we made a webinar about the cal use at Fête des Vignerons, and obviously we expected there were people willing to hear about the masts and all the other arrays that are hanging in the venue. There were 48 cals, and we had 559 loudspeakers, other loudspeakers than cals. So that's part of what you see on the screen. I'm joined with Martin Reich. He's been the audio manager for the project. So Martin was consulting for the Fête des Vignerons when the project started 3 years ago, and he made all the most of the decision in the interaction between the artistic world of the Fête des Vignerons, of the show, and the technical details that on the technical department that was putting this into place with a lot of capacity for sound check, virtual sound checking, with a lot of adaptivity, so we could change setup and layouts according to rehearsal that would be happening on the spot. All of these had to have, all the rehearsal were happening on the spot, so we had to have the arena, we had to have the systems. So so in the planning phase, there was planning to leave a lot of adaptability to that, so that we could make a lot of changes wherever it will be. So Martin's here with us today. He's joining us from Basel, I think. Is it a football stadium?
No, today, sorry. Hello, everybody. Today I'm in a TV infrastructure where we are setting up a system to have fake atmosphere on football games in the future.
So yeah, thank you for being here today. Martin and I have been working together for previously at Montreal Jazz Festival and a couple other shows. And then we'll eventually end up working at this Fête des Vignerons. Did I miss something?
Nope, everything's fine so far.
So I'll start with the history of this show, how it's working, where it's located, and then we'll move to the artistic part, and I'll have Martin help us understand how such a show approaches the technical department and how it's working. So I'm going to optimize this for video clips. And so what I'm about to play is a 3-minute extract video from the show, so you have an idea how the show is looking like. So this is a massive show, obviously, as you can see. It's happening every 20 to 25 years. That was the trailer. This is a couple numbers of the show. It's 20 shows within 3 weeks, and some shows happen during the day and some shows happen during at night, which is more problematic for our friends in the lighting and video department than for us. Yeah, suffice to say, we lived through different kinds of weather. Because some of them were happening at night, some were happening during the day. We're looking at 5,500 people on stage, between artists, volunteers, 240 musicians will appear, disappear, and play on all of the 5 stages. 40 cows, 8 horses, 15 goats will walk around the venue, obviously in a very sus fashion because they'll be cleaned up after their appearance. And that's an audience about 375,000 people.
José, I'm sorry for interrupting. Have you stopped optimizing for video clip?
I have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ignore this interruption. This did not happen.
This is our Zoom officer here that is making sure everything is on ours, which it is. We've been trained well. So it's happening in a temporary arena. So the arena is temporary. It's built for the show. It has 24,000 seats. And this is part of one of the rules. There's a bunch of rules that have been established over time. One of these rules is the arena should contain a seat per inhabitant of the city. So as the city grows, the show or the arena has to grow every event, every time it happens. They have to make a bigger, we have to make a bigger venue, just because the city is growing. So that's one of the rules that you will see later. It's becoming a complex problem to attack. 595 Marsan speakers. There's a speakers you see hanging. There's a bunch of monitors. There's subwoofers and then the seating. There will be 23 galaxies managing this. There's 10 mixing consoles, and the building process is 9 months. So I made a typo here. It's 9 months to build the arena, which means that this place has been held up for 9 months, where people could go. Well, the construction companies could start building the company. And then after this 9-month building process, then the production showed up and started installing technical equipment, rehearse, then the show, and then it'll be a 2-month dismantling in the arena. Around the arena is the celebration is also around the arena. That's about 1 million visitors, 230,000 bottles of wine. That's the bottle of wine that are produced for the event, and the animals who have to be fed as well were used about 23,000 liters of milk. So that's the numbers to give an idea of the overall project. It's happening on the shore of Lac Léman, right next to Geneva, Lausanne, and Vevey. Vevey is the city where the arrow is pointing. This is where the Fête des Vignerons is happening. But around Vevey, the winemaker brotherhood is owning, that's the people that own the land, decided that they would honor the people that work the field, that work the vineyards, by having a parade or having a celebration of the work that is done by the people that work the vineyard. So it's really, the owners are thanking and celebrating the people that work for them. In the meantime, this vineyard and this landscape has been registered at UNESCO, which is protecting the scenery since 6 or 7 years now. So all this area has a big history, and all this history comes back together where this arrow is pointing in the city of Vevey. That's where it's happening. So in the center of the screen, this is the Grand Place, also called Place du Marché, which is the marketplace where the market happens. This is where this event should happen. That's another rule. So this show should happen on this spot, and obviously it's in the middle of the city with the lake on the south, so it cannot expand. While the city is expanding on the outskirts, this place, this area is not expanding. So with the year, the seating has gone more vertical because it's expanding around, but not there. This is a plate on the marketplace that is engraved, and it says, this is here that the Fête des Vignerons should be celebrated. And so therefore all the dates of the previous editions, there was 12 editions before, all the years of the previous 12 editions are engraved in this plate, and it's a landmark where it's a landmark reminder of where this show event should happen. This is the first edition in 1797, so it's the 17th century, about the 17th century, and that's the first time this celebration happened. With time, the winemaker brotherhood started inviting people from around the region, so people living north and southeast of the region also were invited, and the tradition has grown from there. So the first edition, 1797. Then it will evolve. This is all the previous years. There's no pictures, but there are paintings of the previous editions. So this is the second one was in 1819. And then there was a revolution in Switzerland. It can happen. It did happen. So there was a revolution where people fought, and during the war, this event did not happen. So after the war, it was decided that they would do the event once every generation of workers. So they had to define a generation, and it's been put into numbers as between 20 to 25 years. So a generation now is considered 20 to 25 years. And so this is where they went with this step of 20 to 25 years along the way until 1927. And then in 1955, that was the first PA. So there's a couple towers here that you can see. There's a tower here, and there's a tower here. So this is the first PA that happened in this. This is the first time the event was amplified, and that's the PA here. So 1955, and moving on 22 years later to 1977. 1977, the first wireless microphones. Wireless microphones are a commodity now, or feel like a commodity now. It was priceless in 1977. And moving on to 1999, the idea was to have two sittings and the stage opening over the lake. And the solution for that was to have a central point of diffusion. So the center, there was a mast in the center where all the sound should originate. And this is the base for our reflections. This is the base for the show of 2019. The reason for that is when you work in a festival every year, or when you work in an event every year, you have the memory of what's happening, what's happened on the year, and what you take notes for next year, what should change, etc. With this, in 20 years or 22 years, you have so much change in technology that it's very hard to get back to the previous edition and think, oh wow, this is something we could optimize, this is something we can make better, because it doesn't translate to the history of the event. So there was almost all the solutions we had to find or we used were even not thinkable in 1999. The only thing that for us was relevant was it was pretty clear that they wouldn't want to have a central point of diffusion like it is now on the screen. So that's what happened in 1999. It's a Meyer PA, it's MSL5, MSL3, DS4. It's already a self-powered system, but it's all a point source. And so that was the basis. They didn't want to have that I don't know, Martin, if you have comments on how we went from 1999 to 22 years later, 20 years later.
Well, what the main point was is that the creative part of the whole thing is knows what technology can do today. So the new sound quality, the new flexibility, the new wireless stuff, and they wanted to do a complete modern show without limitations, basically.
Yeah, didn't have a limit in the budget as well, so we could envision a lot of things.
Yep, in the beginning they thought that there was no limit in the budget, right?
Yeah, so then they made one and they exploded it, and then the government paid for it. Right. Okay, so this is where it happens. This is the Grand Place with the market. So it's the marketplace, so you can see the market. It's a tiny, tiny space. I don't have the dimensions, but it's about 300, top of my head is about 300 to 100 meters, more or less. And so, as I said, because the rule says you have to have one seat per inhabitant, this is we had to build an arena for 24,000 people, and they had an extension had to be built over the lake. So this spot is going to be filled with the arena, and then there will be an extension over the lake that will hold restaurants and also part of the arena. This is the arena finished. This is this is the arena finished. You can move from the top of the arena where the containers are. You can almost jump onto the roof into the city, because you'll be at the roof height, and on the east side, which is on the left side, which is on the right side of the screen, you can just touch the roof of the house right there, and same thing on the left. At the bottom, on the south, you can see the extension over the lake for the restaurants and the arenas. And this is, so the K is going on the left side and right side, continuing all over the city for after the show, and where people can go out and relax after the show. And so now I'd like to hear from Martin, how the artistic collaboration, how he was approached by the composers, by the artistic director, Michele, what's his name, Pinzi Pasqua, how you were approached and what the discussion were, and how you had to make choices about the equipment.
Well, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I had a call on the other side. Well, it started in summer 2017 when I was approached with the plans of the whole arena and with the 5 stages. And I was asked on how I would put a sound system in place to make this happen. And I saw the 5 stages, and I suddenly knew that they want to play simultaneously on all 5 stages at the same time. So I asked whether it is live content or if it's recorded content to be played, and then they said it's live content. And then it was clear that we would have some problems with timing, and this led to the first disappointment that I had to bring the message that it won't be possible to play on 5 stages at the same time if you do percussive stuff, if you do like drums and things like that. And I showed them plans where I indicated the distance between the stages and the time of propagation time of sound, which is up to 300 milliseconds.
I have a slide for that, but it is later in the presentation. Yes, we had to explain that there was a couple artistic decisions that were quite complex, and so I have graphics that are unfortunately later in the presentation that will illustrate that.
And as you can imagine, they used words like immersive sound, and they wanted to have tracked audio so that you could follow visually the action, or acoustically follow the visual action, which then I had to tell them, yeah, it would be possible technically. Nobody did it before, but it would be possible technically to have a matrix that is capable of routing a signal so that you can follow. But it means that you would have poles every 10 meters with loudspeakers that would point 360 degrees to make it happen for everybody. And that was the goal, that everybody had the same sound in this arena of 20,000 people. And the content was as diverse as speech, because they told a story. Then there was choir singing with 1,000 people choir. There was a brass band with 40 people. There was drums, percussion. Apart from the orchestra, everything was live. The orchestra was recorded. But this decision wasn't taken in the beginning. So in the beginning, we would even had to be able to have a live orchestra playing in the arena. So the decision of recording the orchestra was taken when we knew that they wouldn't play outside due to weather conditions, sun and raining. So that was basically the starting point. And then it turned around in a circle a little while, because the artistic department didn't believe that it wouldn't be possible to do pieces on all 4 stages, because they designed an arena with 5 stages. They wanted to play on 5 stages. So they wanted to use the whole space at all times without limitations. And we had to find a way to explain what will happen if you do that. And it was at that point where I approached José with the idea to build our own simulation tool that we could acoustically simulate the arena. So José used Max MSP, and we put the acoustics parameters algorithms inside the software, so that you can basically virtually sit on every seat and listen what happens if you put music on all 4 stages, if you put the same piece on all 4 stages or 5 stages, or if you put diverse stuff on the different locations. And you could basically walk around inside the arena and listen what's going on time-wise. And that was kind of an eye-opener to the artistic, that we showed them what physically happens in the arena with their content. So maybe José has something to tell about his simulator.
I thought it was a secret. Yeah, so it's using an iPad. So while you connect Pro Tools, they were connecting Pro Tools to the plugin inside the computer, and it's controlled by an iPad, and you can see the arrange dot here is the position. So you could sit in any place in the arena and then orient yourself. So you could turn the head, and it's taking into account the distance and the arena. Yeah. That's about it. It's pretty straightforward, but it's so it's binaural decomposition into headphones, so that so yeah, it could run on a computer, and they could work the music in real time, so they could yeah, take care of the distance. The distance is the previous slide is actually showing this. The previous slide is actually showing we have about 130 meters. And of time of propagation time. This is about 380 milliseconds. So for the people that sits here by the lake, the north stage is about 380 milliseconds late, and the south stage is about 20 milliseconds away or 40 milliseconds away. So with passive instruments, yeah, it definitely was a problem. So yes, that was pretty successful, I guess.
It was a really, really great help to explain the physics of the sound to people that were not aware of these dimensions, and to people that usually have been working with pre-recorded sounds where you could just adjust the delay and make it happen, because you don't have any physical source in the arena. But I told them, if there's a physical source in the arena, you will always hear the physical source also. It's not only the loudspeakers that you will hear. And their goal still was to have the visual connection with the sound source. So we had the field of play that we call it. We had the south, the north, the east, and the west stage. And they wanted to have a physical acoustical connection so that if something happens on the east stage, you also hear it from the east stage. And this is together with the limitations with the sightlines, this was in the end the solution that we proposed, to have towers at each stage. I proposed to have one tower that would cover the 360 degrees, which would acoustically would be enough because there is nobody sitting in the stereo center. So we could have done with one tower per stage, but due to logistical reasons, they didn't like to have one tower in the middle of the stage. They prefer to have two towers, one at one side, at each stage, two towers. So this is what we came up with in the end. And then we started designing the sound system that was needed to be able to have a single point source, basically a single source, and then adding the back speakers of some of the, or of the opposite towers as kind of delay to add a little bit of high frequencies because of the loss of distance.
Yep, that's correct. So you see now on the screen the configuration with all 5 stages. So yes, the center stage I will refer to the field of play. We used to call the field of play. There's a north, south, east, and west stages in all 4 places, and 3 access. So this is the 2 access ramps. So this ramp are hydraulically elevated, and so the characters, the people, the comedians, the actors all walk in from each side. There's vehicles, and then the center, the field of play is made of an LED screen, and there's a ramp that can go down, and it also accepts animals and vehicles. Also, another concern of us was these pink lines are showing the access ramp, the 4 ramps that connect the front of the field of play to the stages. And this is where they wanted to have brass bands, choirs, this kind of elements that require a lot of microphones. And so this is part of the investigation into the sound system that you will see later, about trying to minimize the amount of rejection or coverage from the system that is nearest to this area back into these microphones, because they will be standing in front of the PA.
Yes, quickly coming back to artistic decisions, it was not clear what source would be placed on what stairs or what stage. This was only clear when they were in the arena. So we had to be prepared that any source could be placed anywhere in this arena. So the whole setup had to be stable enough to cover for this, but we will come back later.
I have a couple graphics for that. So in this plane, you see all the 8 masts for each stage, and then the pink rectangle is the mixing position. So each stage has a mixing position across from the field of play. So this, let me take this. So this one here is mixing on this PA system. This person here is mixing on the PA system across. This one is mixing across, and this one is mixing across. So all the stages have a console that is opposite to it in the coverage and mixing for that mast. Even though the inputs are shared between all the consoles, everybody has access to each microphone. They have their own dedicated PA. So that's the versions. Again, you've seen this slide before to illustrate. So now I'm going to talk about the mast. So the implementation for the mast, as Martin said, each mast should cover 180 degrees in the venue. The problem is the front-facing part of the mast has to cover about 130 meters in this case, and then the rear part of the mast is covering about 10 to 30 meters. So there's a ratio in power that needs to be attained between the front and the back, and that we want to keep as consistent as possible. So 16 Leos, which is the biggest member of the Leo family for the front, and this is about 2 tons of loudspeakers. Right next to it, about 35 degrees away, is 55 degrees away is a Lion system. The Lion system has 8 Lions M, which is a main behavior, has a narrow horizontal coverage, and 4 Lions wide, which has a wider coverage. That's about 1 ton, and the coverage for this array is already 35 to 75 meters. There was a discussion: could we decrease to 3 Lion Ws because of availability? So we had to spend some time to investigate if we could do with 9 Lion M and 3 Lion Ws. And you will see in the predictions, the 4 Lion Ws at the bottom are so close that now they have to cover a super wide angle. So this is why 3 wasn't enough, and we had to keep with 4. In behind, leopard array, 12 leopards, 450 kilos. The coverage is about 10 meters to 35 meters. You can see it here. And then on the north to south mast, in the back, were 8 Linas. And under the Leo here, they are here. So these 6 Linas are suspended are hanging under the Leo, and they are meant for the area as a downfill for the area that is here. And so these are on a separate, this area here, they're on a separate feed, so they receive the same feed as the PA, but we can influence that when we have a choir sitting down. We can reduce the gain, we can reduce volume in here. Because people here will get the direct sound, and we will get more gain before feedback. So I'm gonna follow with the predictions. This is the prediction of the mast from south to north. So I'm predicting the south mast, and this is the Leo only of the south stage right mast. So only the 16 Leos from that mast covering across the arena. Yeah. So this is only the Leo, and I'm going to move next. Sorry, clicks. Okay, this is the Lions south. So just before we had the Leo firing across, now we have the Lions. The Lions are firing in the direction of the east stage, so they have to cover all this length. And remember what I was saying about the width of the bottom of the array. This bottom of the array had to cover the entrance, this entrance here. We had to cover this area, and this is why we had to have this wide coverage loudspeakers. Behind is leopard. That's the leopard covering the sitting in the rear, and then the Linas were covering in between the arrays behind the stage. So 180 degrees is more like 200 degrees of coverage all across the arena to cover the whole thing. And so it'll be symmetrical on the other side. So this prediction is a view from the top. And right now we only have the Leos that are going across the arena. And I'm going to add the Lions. So this is with Lions. I will add the leopard. They will fill in the back. This is the leopard. And then Lina in the back. So this is more than 180 degrees of coverage. This is one mast, stage right mast, and I'm going to add now the stage left mast after the Lina in the front. So this is now the coverage of the system from the stage, from the south stage. So everyone, when the south stage is playing, this is the level that everybody is getting at their seats. Now, for the design process, in this case, I avoided using the Galaxy processor, the virtual Galaxy processor. The reason for that is what was interesting to me is the ratio between the system. So is lion okay, or is leopard okay? Can we live with having leopard behind? And the range ratio is huge, because the Leos are covering 130 meters, and the Linas are covering 10 meters, which is 13 times less or 12 times less, which is huge on the dB scale. So it was very interesting to design, but in this case, we avoided using gain control in the virtual galaxies, because we wanted to make sure that if we send the same signal to the speakers, we have the same ratio of power at the destination, if that makes sense. So there's no processing applied here. It's just a measure of the relationship between the speakers. Turned out very well, because we use all three different types without having to cheat. So it turned out pretty well. This is so yeah, that was the south to east, south to north mast. And so the next slides are about the east to west coverage. Remember, the coverage from south to north is much longer than east to west. East to west, we have the same amount of speakers, but the angles in the arrays are vastly different, because the distance is much smaller. So this is the west. This is the east-west mast. 16 Leos, the same thing. Again, 2 tons. And this is we're gonna cover this later. But as you can see, the Lions and the Leos are in front of the mast, within 90-degree quadrant, and so that represents about 3 tons in about 90 degrees of the tower on top, which yield to very interesting discussions. Especially the mast had to be pre-constrained with a negative 1 degree angle, so that when we hang the speakers, the mast would go perfectly vertical. So due to the weight, the mast are slightly reclined in the back, and once there was weight applied, the mast would move into place in the vertical place for the effort, to support the effort. So 8 Lions M, 4 Lions W. The distance, so pay attention to the distance. We have 88 meters for the Leo, so it's much shorter than the 133 meters we had before. The Lions are covering 36 to 70 meters, and this is interesting because the ratio of this array is bigger than the one on the northern mast. So on the northern mast, it was 46 to 70 meters, and it was 35 to 80 meters, and this has actually increased. So now we have 36 to 70. So it's almost the same range ratio. 12 Leopard for 150 kilos in the back, same thing, much closer. And in the end, to save a little bit on cost, save a little bit on weight, we could afford to save the Linas and swap them with a UPQ one piece. So under the Leos and behind the Leos, we have 2 UPQ one piece, either behind the mast as downfill or as rear fill. So this is again a prediction from the Leo only. So this is the east mast projecting to the west sitting. So across the arena. So you see the careful angling to avoid the stage. This is the Lions, which have now a much bigger role. We have now the Leopard in the back. And that's the UPQs covering the inner of the stage. So because the sitting was much smaller, we can afford to get with the UPQ that is about 50 degrees, opening 50 degrees vertically. So now I'm gonna show you this from the top. So now we have the east stage firing at the west sitting. This is the Leo going across the venue. And if you notice the arrow here, you can see the orientation of the system is not straight ahead. So when we started the design, the speaker system was aimed across like this. And then we discussed it. It covers until here. And then we start with the lions covering this area. And then we add the leopards. And then we add the UPQs. And then all of a sudden there was this area here that where we didn't have enough coverage in this area. So we had to move back and then reorient the leopard. This is in map, so it's free. Okay, so we didn't have to move it in the arena, but we had to move the speakers closer back. And so this is why the Leos are not exactly across. We had to validate the fact that we had enough overlap across before we move them out. So this is the Leo. I'm going to add the lion in the corner, leopard in the back, UPQ behind, and UPQ in front. And again, as before, I'm going to add the other side so that that's what the left-right system is looking like. So for the field of play, we had to cover also everyone, and we wanted, and Martin wanted, that sound would come from the center stage, would localize to the stage. So the great idea was to use Cal, because Cal have a very narrower impact in the field of view. So you can see them now on these pictures. There's 48 Cals, and we try to hide them in the people. While keeping intelligibility. That was where the main characters are. This is where we wanted to keep as much intelligibility as possible, while keeping the image, the impact on the image, the smallest as possible. So these images are giving you an idea of, even if the masts are very visible and the arrays are very visible, the cows are trying to hide in the audience while delivering super high intelligibility. That's the field of play. So there's 2 rings of cows. The first ring has 16 cows. I'm gonna move quite fast because we discussed this in a previous webinar. 16 cows. The pink square is the mixing position. They are reclined because we wanted to keep the headroom. When you electronically steer, you lose some headroom. So we had the opportunity to recline the cows, so we were not losing any headroom in the cows. And then we used the electronic steering to compensate for small errors in the building, of the holder. So most of the time we had to move them up and down by 1 or 2 degrees, but just to compensate for the building process. This is a prediction of a cow in the field of play. It's a very narrow beam that is about 5 degrees width. So it's a very, very narrow beam that is going on top of the head of the people and hitting everyone until as far as we can. This one was aimed down by 3 degrees to cover as much as possible. Remember, it was reclined 27 degrees. And so then we had to move it a tiny bit down to compensate for mechanical play. This is a view of all field of play cow. And then there's a second ring of delay cows or relay cows that are on level 5.5. So level 5.5 is this green line. It's this catwalk where you can move on characters and people will move between these different stages. So we call it level 5.5 because it's the reference, but it's also the height of the stages and this catwalk above the field of play. So 5.5 is in meters, it represents the height of this place. So 20 cows, and as you can see on these pictures, and so these cows are now hanging vertically, and there's a couple cows that are round facing back towards the stage as surrounds effects that we'll cover later. But for now, these cows facing towards the audience are acting as relays for the cows that are around the field of play. This is the prediction. And so one interesting thing that I was pointing out on Wednesday is that you can see here, this is the beam in the section view. And because we move them electronically, it also happens behind the cows. So one advantage of that was we could clean everything, all the area in front and the seating in front by tilting the beam up. This is why the cow is standing upright, because by doing this, the price was a little bit in headroom, but we will having the beam in the same place as below, while cleaning up the area behind these cows, be it the audience that is hearing the field of play cows, be it the microphones that will be on the field of play. So that was definitely an advantage of beam steering in this case that we leveraged. This is 5 cows covering this. Obviously, as we go further away from the center, it gets wider. So if we move from 4 cows to 5, and then there was effect surround. So until now, all the speakers are facing the people, and we want the audience to localize where sound is coming from, be it from the center stage or any of the cardinal stages, but also they want to have the capacity to do immersive effects. So the orange lines are surround speakers as UPAs, and to keep the sidelines clean and not obstructs the field of view, we used cows as relays. So the cows here behind are trying to relay or delay for the UPAs, and so this is the point of view of these cows. And in this case, to keep them so that people wouldn't localize and keep them as discrete as possible, we had a very wide beam, so we could take advantage of all the reflections, and that it will be some timing issues, so that at the end you couldn't localize so much into one of the effect surrounds. Then we discovered that there were a couple places that weren't covered as good as we wanted. And so as you can see, this is all the cows in action. And there's 2 spaces behind the main stages, behind the stages that aren't exactly covered as we wanted. So we used the speakers that are pointing there. Also, these speakers get the signal from the mast, but they also get the signal from the cows, so that we could matrix it and time align them to the cows to feel for that's the coverage area of these guys, so that they could feel for the cows in these places. And so that's all the setup. And so with that, I just wanted to thank you, the crew, because it's been a great crew that's been there for 3 months. So they've been building the whole speaker, installing all the speakers, running the cables, rehearsing, programming the console, and then working the show, which were a fairly long day. An example of that is the guy that is mixing the field of play is hidden in this front of house mixing position. And you can see Boris is so under the seating, and he's one of the engineers that doesn't have access. He doesn't have he doesn't get the direct sound from the cow. So the nearest cow is outside here, and so he can't hear it. So he has a pair of AMIs that are tuned to sound like so they are tuned like his monitors. So there's no treatment on it, there's no processing on it. And then there's processing on the other side on his second solo bus. He can process these speakers as if they were delayed to the cows, and so he get a feel for how it is outside, even though he's living in this tent under the seating. The other thing that he did a tremendous work as well in mastering. Kara has more sensitivity in the dynamic range, so there was a lot of work done about keeping the dynamic range compatible, reproducible for the cows, and so he made a tremendous job about having control of all the inputs he had, in some way mastered them before he was sending this out to the PA. And this is the whole crew. So this is all the audio people of this project that have been there for 3 months and working long hours. Martin, if I present this correctly.
Definitely long hours. We didn't have enough time to have parties. That's what I remember, because we had to work so much. It was a tremendous project, and it was a tremendous crew. And in regards of the masts, I have to tell that the guy who designed those masts, that was a genius. Making this possible, I was just telling what I would like to have, and they made it happen. And this is the company Duchot from France that just made a tremendous job on this, and gave us all the freedom to put in place what we wanted to have put in place. And so there was Jean-François Leclerc who designed these masts, and apparently he already did the mast for 1999, I was told. So he's the master of masts, apparently.
Yeah. So yeah, the masts were an adventure, and they're in this. It's one of the slides later. There's an explanation about how the designs were made, and how we had to. Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth talking about the masts. Just back to the whole configuration. So we've seen all the masts, we've seen the cows, and this is the other speakers. This is the configuration of all the other speakers. So in yellow, that's the cows that we've seen. The green speakers are the UPA surrounds around the arena, and the red speakers are the subwoofers. So the subwoofers are hanging under the ceiling, and it's the only place we could put them. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is sightlines, so there wasn't much space to hang them, make big lines, or any other configuration. The other one is we had been asked to be prepared to do an earthquake, and so to reproduce an earthquake, you need a lot of gain. And to get that, we felt that having the subwoofers as close as possible to the people would allow us to get this massive impulse and power into the audience, shake the whole arena. Instead of having a race that will be decreasing over distance, we wanted to have the subwoofers as close as possible to the people to maximize the impact in all the seats. So that was a very interesting. That was part of the design, and we had to solve a couple technical things that were very interesting to solve because of these people. Because it was decided that they would play drums on wine barrels onto the center stage. So they would show up on center stage with these barrels, play drums, and that's the stage where we have cows. And cows is cutting out around 110 hertz. So there's no way the power of these barrels is going to be reproduced and transmitted into the people. So this is where we had to integrate the subwoofer into the center stage to be able to add this vibration on top of the cows. So that's a picture of the subwoofers installed. That was one of my greatest fear, was that it would take a long time to install all these subwoofers, and it turned out the other way. It turned out that was the fastest thing that has been installed. The crew that installed them was tremendous. They installed the speakers and the wiring super fast in a way that it turned out we started tuning the subwoofers. Some of the subwoofers were tuned first, before we could even work on the masts. Here's a representation of the coverage of 1/4 of the arena. You noticed I've been working predictions on 1/4 of the arena because we consider that the arena is symmetrical on both axes. And the reason for that is it's reducing the computation time for the prediction. So using 1/4 of the arena is reducing computation time. It has another practical use in the tuning. But the idea here was that we could do more computation in less time. To give you an idea, this is 18 speakers, but when you predict the mast, this is 108 speakers. And so you have to take all the 108 speaker models over a 3,000 square meters arena and map all of this. It takes some serious time and patience. That's the subwoofer placement seen from above. And so one of the problem is this. If I take this subwoofer, for example, the time of arrival from every stage to the subwoofer is different. Now remember, the subwoofer is under people. So people here will hear the stage sound arrive at different times, but they are very close to the subwoofer, so we have to delay them. And one of the great things about this is that Galaxy allows to do delay for each matrix point. So what happens is each console is sending a sub-feed as a mono signal. So they send left, right to the mast or the center stage or the cows. And then on top of that, they send a mono signal into all the 4 galaxies that are managing the subwoofers. And then from there, each signal is delayed according to the propagation time. So if you look here on the matrix here on top, you can see that there are different timings, and we can probably figure out which stage we are looking at by looking at the time of arrival. So the shortest time of arrival is 34 milliseconds. So this is probably a subwoofer that is close to the south stage, whereas so yeah, if I look at the northern stage, it's 350 milliseconds. So it's 350 milliseconds away from the stage it belongs to. So this is definitely a subwoofer that is on the south side of the city.
José, sorry
yes.
for interrupting. For those that are new to the Matrix, it might be worth pointing out that on YouTube we have a dedicated webinar to channel delivery, and where we talk about the Matrix at great length. So for those that are unfamiliar with what you see here, be sure to consult our YouTube channel, Thinking Sound, and watch the webinar on matrixing. Back to José.
That's correct. I'm trying to explain it in 7 seconds. But yeah, the matrix allows for gain control, but also for time control. So it was very practical because we can manage to have all 5 signals, all 5 stages arrive at different times into the subwoofer, but in time for each stage. And then we have this EQ here. This EQ is only on the subfeed of the center stage. And this is, remember I said, the cal cuts out around 110 dB. And so we added this to bring more power into the signal. The cals are running a much lower level than the stage because they are closer to the people. So the speaker in the mast we are using them at the maximum power and then adding the subwoofers. But because the cals are closer to the people, they're running at a lower level. And because of that, the signal we send in the subwoofer is also at a lower level, and it's about minus 20 dBs. So knowing that we are sending a signal that is minus 20 dBs of the whole spectrum, we pushed this EQ in the part of the spectrum we wanted to help from the cows. And then Boris, that you saw before, is actually managing this loudness into this impact and loudness into this area, so that we have 18-inch speaker long excursion drivers that are doing the low end and impact rather than 4-inch drivers in a column loudspeaker. So that was a trick because we could afford the headroom to do that, and it was very interesting to be able to bring this because we were expecting that at first we were expecting we needed a much more complex matricing system, and then all of a sudden it was there. It was in the Galaxy. There was no complex system, no Dimitri, no complex things to add. It was all there. The other thing is our other worry, and I'll let Martin chime in on this, is we were having brass bands and choirs under the mast in front. And so Can you explain that? Can you explain how we ended up in this situation and how the rehearsals went?
So at one point in the discussion, in the artistic discussion, 1 year ahead of the show, the artistic people found out that putting a choir on a flat stage at 5 meters height would not be so fortunate for the choir, because the singers would not be seen, or would be seen only by the people being above 5 meters and not by the people being lower than the 5.5 stage. So they asked me if it would be possible to put the choir just in front of the stage onto the stairs. And I said, well, we've been asked to pick up the choir as a live source. And how can you pick up a choir? You put some omnidirectional microphones in the hair of the singers. And we also had poles with wireless microphones with Shure KSM9s as a stereo couple on a pole and held by a sound engineer that was placed inside the choir. So we had some microphones, cardio ones, and in the end, a choir on that stairs here was picked up by around 48 microphones, and 40 of them omnidirectional miniature DPAs. So the problem is you're standing in front of a PA that's meant to shoot 130 meters, and you wouldn't like to have a feedback with such a big system, but you still have to cover the 22,000, 25,000 spectators. So we had to be quite sure of what we're doing before we deployed it on site. But you never have a guarantee. If you do a simulation, you will never get a guarantee if the simulation is really exactly what you will get in the arena. So this is where José came into play again.
Yeah, so I was integrated in a project 1 year before the project and doing a lot of predictions. And especially so there was the predictions about the coverage, and then we had to investigate a bunch of things that we were interested into. One of the questions we had, so there was the choir that you saw, there was the timing issues, there was how we would take care of the subwoofers, and then there was the number one question was, what's happening with the low mids behind the mast? So we have this massive LEO array that is shooting 130 meters, and then behind you have this tiny Lina array that is trying to keep up with it. And so we had to do careful angling for two reasons. Well, obviously for good sound, but there were two criteria here. One is the people across. So we're in a city, and so noise constraints were super high because they already, when we started the tuning, there was already 9 months of construction. So there was already 9 months of hammering, building a stage. It's of loud noises all day long and all week long. People were already not very happy to hear pink noise at tuning. But also during the shows, we wanted to be sure that we are not shooting too much into the window. So the angling was critical in front because we didn't want it to overshoot too much, but also behind because we didn't want to have such a shallow angle that we shoot in the sitting behind. So what you see behind here is a fake. So this place here is a fake wall to illustrate where the system is hitting. And so obviously this is above the last seats, which is what we wanted, because then we only had to feel, this is in the low mid range, I think this is 250 hertz. So we actually had to feel with the Linas. We wanted the Linas to be audible on all the spectrum, and so that people would localize into the mast and near stage. So one of the research here was to make sure that we didn't blast people behind. And you can see here in the section view, that's a north to south, that's a south to north projection. And so obviously I added a fake wall here. And this is so that's the projection that goes across. So avoiding the center stage, not hitting the windows on the other side and not hitting the people behind. So it was careful angling in this, and the rejection under the speakers was critical for the microphones, as Martin mentioned. So that was defining the length of the array, and I was questioning it sometime before if we could skip some Leos, have less speakers, and eventually we had to settle with 16. The reason was we wanted a beam narrow enough that would go across the stage without interfering with the choirs that will be placed in front, as you saw in the previous picture. This is the rejection from east to west. Same problem. And so same confirmation using prediction software and same delicate angling. That's an example of the rejection. So this is the simulation of the seating. So if you remember on the previous slide, there are 3 microphones. You can see that's the yellow dots here. There's a microphone behind, there's a microphone underneath, and there's a microphone across. So here, the red line is what people hear across. And remember, there's no processing applied here. So there's a loss in the HF because that's a loudspeaker system that's covering about 80 meters. So there's air attenuation involved, and it's not compensated in the simulation. What is interesting to us is the design without that, and especially what's the headroom we have in between the different positions. So this is the west sitting across, so 87 meters across the arena from the main PA. The east sitting that is behind is the blue trace. So the microphone behind the Leos, and this is the Leos and the Lions together, and that's what we get. And under the Leo, it's the blue line, and that's the net result we get in headroom. 7 dB of headroom behind, which is a 1:2 ratio, about a 1:2 ratio, which is great because it means that there's this energy behind the mast, and we just have to double the amount of energy with the tiny linear array that's behind there. So we need to add 6 dB, it's great. It's not too complex. And then we have 12 dBs of rejection under the array, which is great because it's giving us 12 dB of headroom. And also the length of the array is pushing the rejection to a lower frequency. You can see here 125. So we could afford to have low-cut filters placed around in this 100 hertz region rather than being too high because we hear the PA through the microphones. So this next slide is a recording. Of people in this it's a recording of the choir. So it's what you will hear are the microphones that are capturing the choir that is placed in front of the PA. So that's the arena where the choir is, and I'm going to play it while muting my microphone. I'm going to play it so that you can hear the quality of the microphone pickup. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce a nice fade, and the file is quite long, so I think it gives a good idea of of the recording. As you see on the slide here, the Mass War Struggle and Jean-François Leclerc from Duchot, which was managing the project, he's here with us on the call today. He was managing the project, and he did a tremendous job, especially on the electrical and mechanical part, but also a fantastic job of leading a team of people, a small team of people that was at the service of the crew, of the audio crew, that they could request things and they could get it, and quite in time. And you have to remember that Switzerland is not part of the European Union, so everything has to go through customs. So he made a tremendous job of making it easy from the crew point of view, that hey, we need this or we need that, and it would happen. And so that was great for us, as well as leading all the effort that led to building and tuning the system. So this is the part about the masts, and I'm going to try to explain it. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure he will manifest itself if I say something wrong. So that's the mast. You're looking at mast about 26 meters high. The original mast were 32 meters. So the original design was higher. And one of the very first things that happened was how much weight do you put on this? And the total weight ends up being 8 tons, including lighting, cabling, speakers. And so that's a lot of weight. For the turrets that are on top, the turrets that you see on top of the mast is 7 meters across in diameter. And so they run some math, and that's when the Fête de Vignerons came back to us and said, hey, that's pretty heavy load. And then the other thing is, we were thinking that if there's bad weather, there will be wind. And how much wind can you afford? Because we have a wind limitation about, I think the first wind limitation was 140 kilometers per hour. So so we sent this to the mechanical engineers. They did the math. How much weight could we hang in these winds? And it turned out that all the speakers could stay hanging except the Leos that are too wide and too big, and they would act like a very big sail. So the only restriction was at decision time. The decision time is 4 hours before the show. At decision time, if the weather is exceeding 80 kilometers per hour, with the risk of going higher, then we'd have to bring the Leo down. And you have to imagine the Leos are 22 meters, 24.5 meters. We have to bring them down in wind, in about 80 kilometers wind, probably in the rain. So it was, thankfully it didn't happen, but it was crazy just to imagine doing it. We had bad weather, we had rain, we had a lot of, we've been under the elements, but we never had to bring the system down during the show. But the Leo systems, all the Leo systems were equipped with the 8 Plus motors, so that we could bring them down without having to go up in the mast and take out safety chains and safeties all around the place. So the Leos weren't safed like the other speakers with chains and cables. Rather, they were ready to be taken down if needed be. The Leos are hanging by gravity. The Lions are restrained. You can see there's a small catwalk here, and this small catwalk is restraining the Lions so they cannot move as well as the Leopard. What else? So yeah, so we're in the mast, designing for 32 meters. And so the next thing we know is, wait, if the mast is going to bend so much with this weight that we have to bring them down to 26 meters. So we brought them down 26 meters. We had to redo all the angles, which yield to the discussion I had before about the rejection. So yeah, it was very disappointing. This is also where we realized that not everybody was using the same coordinate system. So I was taking the base of the mast as my 0 point. Jean-François was taking the field of play, and most of the artistical direction was taking level 5.5 as level 0. So Jean-François discovered that all the plans were right, the right scale, but they all had a point of origin that was in a different place. So we ended up in my design. My original design, for example, was 2 meters higher. Once we put everything into the same software, we discovered that the speakers weren't in a very logical place, and so that's where we discovered that all the points of origin of the main people working the plants were not in the same place. So it was a crazy endeavor, and he managed to put back everything together and bring us back on track with that. That's here you have the base of the masts, and as I was saying, because 1/3 of the weight is in front, the masts are reclined 1 degree in the opposite direction, so that once we hang the Leos, we know that the mast is going to move forward and be in a vertical position. Also, Jean-François did also a bunch of tests in Paris where he put dynamometers in the motors, so he could check, they could verify what the dynamic load was when the array is going up, because the array weighs 2 tons, but when it's moving and it's traveling across the chain hoist for 20 meters, we wanted to know what the loads were on the platform, so that we could get a safe margin by moving everything, and what would happen if we get a little bit of wind, which eventually happened. This is a view from above. This is the speaker placement. You can see the lions here on top, the Leos in front, and the lions on the side. So this represents about 3.5 tons here. And as I said, the diameter here is 7 meters. So the turret is 7 meters. That's seen from below. And there's you can see here the lion and the leopard are restrained against this catwalk here. That was made against wind, because we expected that if there was wind, the Leo would come down, and that's the only ones that would stay up there and would try to move a little bit. And I think the next video is a video clip. Oh no, there's just before that, there's a small explanation. Once we discovered the error in the plans, and we were asked to move down the arrays, there was a massive impact on the calculation. So this is also something we had to take into account. This is why I'm saying the angling was super important, and we spent a lot of time at build up to ensure that the angling and the mechanical positioning was exactly as it should be, because the small differences would be very heavy on the picker point. So here you see the turret on the left side. That's the first design. It's higher. The array is tilted down a little bit more, and there's only about 100 kilo on the front motors. Now, once we had to bring them down, all of a sudden this increased to about 700 kilos. So 7-fold, 7 times more weight to the front. Over this momentum, it was a little bit too much, so we had to find a compromise, which was very elegant. So we had to find a compromise with the angles of the arrays, and then set all this in place. But that's one of the things that appeared later on the design. We had this design, we were pretty happy about it, and then once the mast changed, it had a massive impact, because all the calculation had to be redone in all the departments to make sure that we could afford to do that without the mast falling down. Because remember, if a mast would fall down, it would definitely end up in a house. So that wouldn't be very good for the continuity of the winemakers brotherhood. One of the good things about the project is we were welcomed with open arms in Paris, at Duchot headquarters in Paris. This is the Cal nursery. Cal has presets, and it was great because all the components could be loaded. So all the cows were pre-loaded in Paris. You see on the picture all 48 cows that were used at Fête de Vignerons in their flight cases, or just freshly arrived from the factory. And so that was great to be there and being able to program all the things and test the network loads to make sure that we wouldn't break the network over there. All the racks could be made ready, all the servers could be made ready over there, and then shipped it and then built it in the arena. That's the galaxy. There are 4 galaxies in this position. So in each front of house position, there are 4 galaxies. There's 5 galaxies. 1 for the subwoofers, 1 for the nearest subwoofers, and then 4 for the masts, 2 each side. And then on top of this, there are ARM servers. Our ARM servers are monitoring the status of the amplifiers because the speakers are self-powered, the amplifiers are within the loudspeaker. And so ARM server allows from a remote computer to control and monitor what's happening within the speaker. If the speaker is alive, if the fans are running, if the temperature is too high, all of this is monitored, and all of this is already, because I see my line appear, and all of this has been explained in the previous video.
Yeah, be sure to go to our YouTube channel where we have dedicated an entire episode on our RM server. Back to you, José.
It is. Yeah. The tuning and commissioning happened. Happened over many days before. Every time we brought speakers in, Ludo was identifying the speakers, giving them a name, put them into ARM server, and then we bring them up into the air. This is not a low quality picture. It's raining on this picture, and it's representative of the tuning. It rained about every day except for one day where we got a sunburn, but all other days it was raining. So we had to be quite creative with umbrellas and not breaking our equipment. You can see, so Martin is sitting here on the left side. We are across the north stage, and this is the way we approach tuning. During setup, remember I talked many times about the angles, about the mechanical properties of the arrays that we wanted to achieve. And so at setup, because we know there is play in the rigging, what we did is we did build one mast to validate all the angles. So actually now we are, even though the arrays are being built, the one in front of us is already in its final position, and what Martin and I are validating the coverage, so that if this is good, then we build the other mast, rather than build everything, tune it, and then discover that some of the coverage is not ideal, and we would want to change the angling, where we had to bring down all the masts again and make changes and then bring it up again. So very importantly, at first we wanted to have one north mast and one east mast. This is why it doesn't look like being synchronous, because we wanted to validate the mechanical positioning, the angling, and all of that. And yes, we had to bring them back down and make changes and bring them back up by a few things, but obviously it was quite quick. But yes, we had to make a couple changes based on the environment. So that was great to have the capacity to do that. And then once we were set with one mast, we could copy paste the data. So the processing data could be copy pasted to the other masts. And then we'd build the other mast, and then we'd verify the coverage of these masts again, and then move on to the next part. Cows were also a challenge, a very interesting challenge, because we had to change the beams in the cows. So there was a lot of, obviously it can be adjusted electronically, but we had to adapt for the mountain on the tube, and so the tube can wobble, and so we had to take into account this mounting system, so that we would electronically change the beam to cover what we wanted. Remember, cows are doing 5-degree beams, so the aiming and they're aiming about 40 meters. So there's a lot of momentum here, and so we wanted to be very, very precise with these guys. And this is actually adding intelligibility. So having narrow beams was bringing a super high amount of intelligibility. It needed to be very precise. So that was along the way. So in the tuning process, we started with the north mast, the east mast, and then moved to the cows while the other masts were being built. and then I had pre-checked the subwoofers, and that's the next thing. Then I worked the subwoofers once I had the mast. So I did 1/4 of the arena, and then jump in the plane to go in a different place of the world, work. And in the plane, I took the data I gathered from the subwoofers and put this back into virtual galaxies. So flying to Bratislava, and actually took me more time copy pasting the data from the data I have, so 1/4 of the arena, to the other 3/4 of the arena in the virtual world, then to take measurements, and then we just had to come back, put this into the galaxies, and then go and validate if the tuning was right. On this picture, we are measuring a subwoofer. You can see the subwoofer is underneath. It's hanging there, and it was obviously raining, so we're using our helmets. One of the helmets to protect the measurement microphone, the inexpensive measurement microphone. So that brings me to weather. It's an outdoor show. The PA system's been outdoors for 2 or 3 months. And so the weather has been very good, with a lot of sun, where we could get good sunburns. And then get a dip in. Nicely, there's a lake next to us, so we could get a dip in the lake. But so we had good weather, and then we had bad weather. So this is in the show. There was a thunderstorm approaching, and this is the only show that has been canceled. So it's been canceled halfway through the show. The show is 3 hours long, and 1 hour and 40 minutes into the show, this show has been canceled. The lighting strikes were a little bit too close for comfort, obviously with the mast. So the arena is supposedly protected against lighting strikes, but nobody wanted to try. So in a good Swiss manner, people were asked to calmly stand up and move out to the field of play, and then out the arena to a safer place. So that's the weather we had. Speakers been hanging there, and the next slide has a video. And so right now I need to optimize this for video clips. And so there's a video clip with sound, and you will see the Lina arrays under the mast after having been built. So that's when we were building. So and that's the Leopard. So the Leopard is actually not yet anchored into the mast. So that was a good crash test for it. I think we didn't break anything. At least we didn't break loudspeakers. But it was very impressive. And so yeah, that's the time where you don't want to go in the mast and try to bring them down. And so yeah, so that was a very impressive moment. Past that, we anchored them into the mast, and the only other time we had so much wind, it's a different video, but that is not here. The Leos are very calmly moving from front to back, so they just wobbling front to back very easily. But the craziest thing is the mast is actually going like this, and that was the very impressive thing. The flexibility in the mast was super impressive. We didn't break loudspeakers, but cables. There were cables that were stuck between Lions and the mast, and these cables is one Socapex cable for power and one 12-channel multi-core were trapped between the back of a Lion and the mast, and this cable was cut. So it cut straight through it, and we had to replace this cable. It's just to give you an idea of the size of this cable, so it gives you an idea of the force that was involved. Yeah, adversity. Again, the crew showed good humor, and obviously we had also good weather. That's in the daylight. That's one of the final pieces where you have most of the 5,500 people on stage. And with this, it's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for being with us, and especially hello to our Japanese friends that are joining today. I forgot to check what's the time, but thank you for joining. Thank you everyone for being there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask questions. Haven't been following in the chat, but Martin and I are here, and we're very happy to answer all the questions you might have about this presentation.
Thank you, José. Thank you, Martin. Please be sure to make use of José's invitation to put any questions you might have in the chat. Okay, so everybody gets it.
Cool.
And that means that without further ado, thank you very much, José. Thank you again, Martin, for joining us for part 2 of the Fête de Vignerons, a super impressive production.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, it's not our fault. So we didn't have this the idea about the size. So
right. No, I mean it's amazing. Come on, look at it. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, thank you, José. Thank you, Martin. As always, a recording of today's webinar can be found within the next couple of hours on our Thinking Sound YouTube channel, as well as all the other topics that José mentioned during his presentation, such as RM server, matrixing using Galaxy devices, and everything about column array loudspeakers. All of that you can find over there. And that means that it's Friday. It's almost happy weekend. Be sure to join us next week. Next week, we're preparing something truly amazing. So please stay tuned and hopefully see you next week. And that means once again, thank you, José. Thank you, Martin. And to those that joined us today, please stay safe and healthy, and best to you and your loved ones. Bye-bye.
Salut Martin, merci.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Merci beaucoup.